The ground beneath a great city holds its deepest secrets. We often walk above a hidden metropolis of tunnels, chambers, and forgotten passages that once decided the rise and fall of empires. This journey will take us into the shadowy realms beneath ancient capitals like Rome, Constantinople, and Zion. We will see how these subterranean networks were not just curiosities, but sophisticated blueprints for survival. Ancient engineers and rulers used the earth itself as a shield against invasion, scarcity, and the collapse of order. By the end, you will understand the ingenious principles that allowed civilizations to endure for centuries, lessons that still shape our cities today. How did a hidden reservoir make a capital unconquerable? What forgotten tactics kept a community alive when the world above turned hostile? The answers lie in the dark, waiting to be uncovered. What does it truly take for a society to outlast its greatest threats? A city is much more than its skyline. To truly understand its strength, you must look beneath its streets. Think of a great capital not as a collection of buildings, but as a living body. The palaces, temples, and markets are its skin and muscle, the visible face it shows the world. But just beneath the surface lies a hidden anatomy, a complex network of tunnels, cisterns, and chambers that functioned as its vital circulatory and nervous systems. This is the subterranean capital, the intentionally engineered underworld that was as crucial to a city's survival as its walls. It was not a random collection of caves or forgotten basements. These were deliberate, calculated architectural spaces, designed with a clear purpose long before the first stone was laid above. Urban archaeologists studying these sites emphasize they were not accidental discoveries made later, but foundational components of the original urban plan. The motivations for building down were starkly practical, born from three universal urban challenges. The first was security, creating hidden routes for movement and refuge during conflict. The second was resource management, securing a stable supply of water, food, and materials safe from siege or contamination. The third was a form of social control, managing the flow of people, goods, and even spiritual life through channels invisible to the everyday citizen. By mastering the world below, ancient rulers could project power and maintain a fragile stability, ensuring the heart of their empire kept beating even when the surface was under threat. The ground was not just something to build on, it was the ultimate strategic asset. The first strategy was to hide the city's vital organs underground, but the second was far more profound. It involved turning the very earth itself into a fortress. Not every landscape could support such an ambition. The success of an underground refuge depended entirely on a deep, intuitive understanding of local geology, a partnership between human need and the character of the stone. In the heart of modern Turkey lies the region of Cappadocia, a landscape sculpted by ancient volcanoes into a surreal wonderland of soft, porous rock called tuff. Here, the ground was not a barrier but an invitation. The builders of Derinkuyu did not construct their subterranean city, they revealed it, carefully carving downwards into the malleable stone. This was not random excavation. Long before the science of geology had a name, these ancient engineers possessed a sophisticated, practical knowledge of their environment. They could assess the stability of rock layers, intuitively understanding which strata were strong enough to support vast, multi-level chambers and which were too fragile. They had to know precisely where the water table lay, ensuring their city remained dry, yet also knowing where to dig wells to reach it. Most critically, they planned for breath. Ventilation was the silent, invisible challenge of any deep underground space. At Derinkuyu, the solution was elegant and effective. Dozens of narrow, vertical shafts were carved from the surface down through all 8 levels of the city, some plunging over 80 meters deep. These acted as natural chimneys, creating a passive airflow system that drew stale air up and out while pulling fresh, clean air down into the deepest chambers. It was a masterpiece of environmental engineering, conceived centuries before the principles of airflow were formally understood. But a refuge is only as strong as its door. The entrances to Derinkuyu were protected by a brilliant and simple device, massive circular stone doors. These were not hinged gates, but enormous millstone-like discs, rolled into place from within to completely seal the narrow passageways. Once closed, these doors were virtually impossible to force open from the outside, and they fit so snugly that they also helped control the internal atmosphere and block potential flooding or smoke. This was survival through profound adaptation. The people of Cappadocia did not fight their soft, volcanic landscape. They embraced its unique properties. They saw the weakness of the tough and transformed it into their greatest strength. Their underground world was not a desperate last resort, but a deliberate, sustainable design for long-term security, a lesson written in stone about working with the world you are given rather than conquering it. But a city carved from soft rock was a unique solution, one not available to every civilization. For the great capitals built on plains or hills, the most critical underground strategy revolved around a single, clear element: water. In the heat of a Roman summer, a citizen gathering at a public fountain would see only the cool, clear flow from the spout. They would likely never see the true marvel, the silent, hidden journey that water had taken. For miles, it traveled through a perfectly graded channel, often buried deep underground, an invisible river of life called an aqueduct. This was the third revelation, that water was not just a resource, but the subterranean lifeline, and mastering its hidden flow was the ultimate act of urban foresight. Ancient engineers transformed hydraulics into a strategic science. In Persia, for centuries, communities survived in arid landscapes using a system known as the Qanat. These were not simple wells, but gently sloping tunnels dug back into the foothills, sometimes for dozens of miles, to tap into underground aquifers. The genius was in the gradient, a slight, consistent slope that allowed water to flow by gravity alone, emerging cool and clean at the surface far out on the plain where a settlement could thrive. It was a secret water source, its origin point hidden in the distant mountains, safe from enemy contamination or control. Back in Rome, the mastery was in distribution and, just as importantly, in removal. The Cloaca Maxima, begun as a simple drainage channel, evolved into a vast underground sewer, a mirrored system to the aqueducts that kept the city healthy. The Roman official Frontinus, who oversaw the city's water, wrote with pride about this precision, noting the exact measurements of every pipe and channel, a network so reliable it became a point of civic pride and a symbol of Roman order. But perhaps the most dramatic example lies beneath what was once Constantinople. Here, Byzantine engineers faced the constant threat of siege. Their solution was not just to bring water in, but to store impossible quantities of it invisibly. They constructed vast, cathedral-like underground cisterns, such as the Basilica Cistern, with forests of recycled columns holding up cavernous ceilings. These were not damp cellars, but engineered reservoirs, sealed with special hydraulic plaster to hold millions of gallons, a supply that could sustain the city for months if its aqueducts were cut. This was the profound strategic shift. A hidden water source meant a city could not be starved into submission. The pulse of the metropolis, its daily life and its very will to resist, was safeguarded in the dark, silent chambers beneath the streets. Controlling water meant controlling time itself, outlasting any enemy at the gates. Yet even with water secured, a city's spirit could still be under threat. The fourth dimension of survival unfolded in places like the Roman Catacombs, where the very darkness became a sanctuary for identity. These were not engineered cisterns or strategic tunnels, but labyrinths of memory and faith, carved from soft volcanic rock outside the city walls. For early Christian communities facing periods of social exclusion and legal peril, these subterranean passages served a purpose far beyond their primary function as resting places. They became clandestine meeting grounds where the community could gather in safety, away from watchful eyes. The catacombs provided a profound duality. On one level, they were a practical refuge, a physical space where rituals could be performed, scriptures shared, and leadership organized without immediate fear. But on a deeper, symbolic level, they functioned as a powerful womb of cultural and spiritual rebirth. Social historians note that in times when public expression of their faith was dangerous, these hidden corridors allowed the community to preserve its core traditions, its stories, and its bonds. The act of gathering in the earth, surrounded by the memorials of those who came before, reinforced a powerful narrative of continuity and solidarity. It whispered that the community was rooted in something older and more enduring than the political powers of the day. This reveals a critical layer of urban survival strategy. It is not only about securing water or building walls, but about safeguarding the social fabric itself. When the world above becomes hostile, the world below can offer a space to nurture the intangible essentials of community, shared belief, and collective identity. The catacombs were a testament to resilience, proving that a people could maintain their cohesion and purpose even when forced into the shadows, ensuring that their culture did not simply survive, but was prepared to re-emerge. The grand spectacle of the Roman Forum was a carefully managed performance of power, but its true script was written in the dark. Beneath the marble floors where senators debated and citizens gathered lay a second inverted city, a multi-layered maze of concrete and shadow. This hidden Rome was far more than the Cloaca Maxima. It was a fully integrated underworld of logistics, espionage, and environmental control, a silent machine that kept the empire's heart beating. To walk from the sun-drenched forum into a cryptoporticus was to experience this duality firsthand. These were not mere tunnels, but elegant, barrel-vaulted passageways, often lined with fine stucco and lit by carefully placed windows or lamps. They served as climate-controlled corridors, allowing the elite to move between temples, basilicas, and palaces shielded from the summer heat or the gaze of the public. A senator could disappear into one entrance and emerge somewhere else entirely, his political maneuvers literally unfolding beneath the feet of the populace. This architecture of secrecy regulated political power by making movement itself a privilege. But survival required more than covert corridors, it demanded full bellies. Scattered beneath the city, particularly along the Tiber riverfront, were the Horia, the vast underground granaries. Roman writers like Pliny the Elder noted the critical importance of preserving the public grain supply. These were not simple storage pits. Archaeological excavations reveal sophisticated complexes with raised floors to combat dampness, thick walls for insulation, and complex ventilation systems to maintain a cool, stable environment. The grain dole was a tool of social control, a promise of stability that kept the masses content. By burying this vital resource, Rome protected it from fire, spoilage, and potential sabotage, ensuring that the leverage of food security was never compromised. The city's calm depended on these silent, subterranean reservoirs of wheat. The underworld even extended into private luxury and spiritual life. Wealthy patricians often built elaborate spelunci, artificial grottos beneath their villas. These cool, decorated chambers, sometimes with running water and mosaic floors, were escapes from the city's noise and heat. They served as dining rooms, libraries, or private shrines, blending comfort with a symbolic connection to the mythological underworld. Here, the elite could retreat, reflect, and reaffirm their status in a space utterly removed from the common realm. This deep dive reveals a staggering truth. Rome's dominance was maintained not just by its legions or laws, but by a masterfully engineered hidden infrastructure. It managed everything from the covert movement of leaders to the literal foundation of the economy, from climate control to private contemplation. This was integrated urban planning on a scale the world had never seen, a precedent that taught a powerful lesson. A truly great capital must function on two levels: the visible theater of power and the invisible, indispensable machinery that makes the performance possible. The true currency of an ancient empire was not gold but grain. Beneath the palaces and temples, the most secure vaults did not hold coins or jewels, they held sustenance. This is the sixth principle, the strategy of abundance, and it transformed simple storage into a profound act of statecraft. Across civilizations, from the Indus Valley to the heart of China, leaders understood that controlling surplus was the ultimate source of stability. In the meticulously planned streets of Mohenjo-Daro, over 4,000 years ago, archaeologists have uncovered rows of standardized brick pits beneath the floors of granaries. These were not random holes. Their uniform design and strategic placement near the citadel suggest a centralized, state-managed system for collecting and redistributing harvests. Economic historians point to this as a foundational innovation. By securing the food supply underground, safe from pests, spoilage, and easy theft, early states could do more than prevent hunger. They could regulate the economy, support a non-farming class of artisans and soldiers, and wield the promise of rations as a powerful tool for social cohesion. The engineering behind these spaces was a quiet science of preservation. In China, near the ancient capital of Xi'an, the remains of vast underground storage complexes reveal a mastery of environmental control. Builders would dig deep, bell-shaped pits with narrow openings. These were meticulously lined with layers of straw, clay, and wood ash, creating a sealed, insulated chamber. The small opening at the top would be sealed with a clay lid and earth, creating a stable, cool, and oxygen-poor environment where grain could be preserved remarkably for years. This was long-term thinking made physical. A full granary was a city's confidence. It was a buffer against poor harvests, a reserve that could outlast a siege, and a strategic stockpile that allowed a ruler to feed the populace during hardship, thereby maintaining order and loyalty. The practice was never just about hoarding. It was about foresight. It recognized that survival is not merely a reaction to crisis, but a continuous project of accumulation and protection. By burying their abundance, these early urban planners were literally embedding resilience into the foundation of their society, ensuring that the community's future was secured, one carefully stored harvest at a time. A city's walls could be breached, but its whispers were harder to silence. The seventh strategy for survival moved beyond storing resources or providing refuge. It focused on the invisible flow of information and people. When a capital was under siege, its greatest vulnerability was isolation, being cut off from its own districts and from the outside world. The solution was to build a second, secret circulatory system beneath the streets, a network of tunnels designed for covert movement. These were not the grand public cryptoporticus of Rome, but narrow, purposeful passages known only to a select few. Beneath the fortified rock of the Acropolis in Athens, for instance, archaeologists have long debated the function of certain narrow, man-made tunnels leading from the summit. While their exact purpose remains part of the site's mystery, military historians suggest they could have served as emergency escape routes for defenders or as clandestine access points for bringing in supplies during a prolonged attack. The strategic value was immense. A single, hidden corridor could allow a commander to shift troops from one beleaguered gate to another without exposing them to arrow fire. It could enable a spy to slip out of the city to seek allies, or permit a messenger to carry orders across town when the streets were a battlefield. The engineering of these passages was a study in secrecy and practicality. Entrances were camouflaged, often hidden within cisterns, behind false walls in storerooms, or under the flagstones of a temple. The tunnels themselves were frequently narrow, forcing movement in single file, and deliberately labyrinthine to confuse any enemy who might discover one entrance. But perhaps their most clever feature was acoustic. Some passages were engineered with specific sonic properties. A sudden shout or the strike of a tool against the wall could carry surprising distances down these stone channels, acting as a simple but effective early warning system or a way to send coded signals between distant points. This created a powerful psychological advantage, the weapon of uncertainty. An attacking force could never be sure if the defenders had a way to move unseen, to receive information, or to suddenly appear behind their lines. The very idea of these hidden arteries sapped an enemy's confidence, making the city itself feel like a living, intelligent adversary. In medieval European castles, these souterrains or underground passages were a standard feature of fortification. They connected keeps to outer bailies, provided access to hidden postern gates, and led to secure water sources. They turned a static stone structure into a dynamic, responsive fortress. This insight transforms our understanding of urban resilience. It shows that survival depends not just on what you have, but on how you can move it and what you know and when you know it. By burying their lines of communication, ancient capitals protected their most fluid and vital asset, their ability to adapt, to react, and to stay one silent step ahead of any threat. Yet the most profound refuge was not for the body but for the soul. Beneath the bustling streets of Rome or the holy city of Jerusalem, another kind of sanctuary existed, one where darkness was not a barrier but a doorway. These were the sacred caves and temples carved into the living rock, spaces where communities sought not just safety from physical threat, but psychological and spiritual fortification in times of profound uncertainty. In the shadowy Mithraea scattered throughout the Roman Empire, initiates would descend into windowless, cavern-like chambers to participate in the mysteries of the god Mithras. The very architecture was symbolic, designed to mimic the cave where, according to the myth, Mithras captured and sacrificed the cosmic bull. This was not a random setting. Scholars of comparative religion note a near-universal human tendency to associate caves and underground spaces with origins, transformation, and the divine. Across cultures, from the Paleolithic caves of Lascaux to the sacred grottos of Greek oracles, the Earth's interior has been seen as a place of creation and revelation, a return to a primal, protected womb. By deliberately building their temples underground, these communities were tapping into a deep, psychological archetype of safety and rebirth. The design of these spaces was meticulously crafted to amplify this feeling. Acoustics played a crucial role. In the echoing chambers of a Mithraeum or the subterranean shrines beneath Jerusalem, sound behaved differently. A chant or a whispered prayer would reverberate, seeming to come from the walls themselves, creating an immersive, otherworldly atmosphere that separated the experience from the ordinary world above. The iconography reinforced this. Walls were painted with celestial symbols, altars were carved with scenes of divine struggle and triumph, and the alignment of the space often tracked with the sun's path, allowing a single beam of light to pierce the darkness on a significant day. This was environmental storytelling at its most powerful. The experience was designed to be transformative, to make the participant feel they were at the center of a cosmic drama, protected by forces greater than any earthly army. This practice reveals the eighth and perhaps most subtle layer of urban survival strategy. To endure a crisis, a community needs more than grain and water. It needs a reason to endure. It needs a narrative that frames hardship not as meaningless suffering, but as part of a protected destiny or a necessary trial. By sanctifying the underground, these ancient cultures provided a psychological sanctuary. They used myth, ritual, and sacred architecture to forge a resilient spirit, to bolster communal morale and to offer a profound sense of order and meaning when the world above seemed chaotic or hostile. Survival, in its fullest sense, required nourishing the human spirit as diligently as the human body. The silent, columned forest of the Basilica Cistern was Constantinople's greatest secret. To stand on its walkways today is to witness the ultimate fusion of architectural beauty and ruthless strategic logic. This was not merely a storage tank, it was the Byzantine Empire's subterranean heart, engineered for one brutal purpose: to outlast any siege. Constructed in the 6th century under the ambitious Emperor Justinian, the cistern was a masterpiece of repurposed strength. Its ceiling, a vast brick vault, is supported by a breathtaking grid of 336 columns, many salvaged from ruined classical temples. This was a practical decision, recycling sturdy marble, but also a symbolic one, suggesting the new Christian empire was literally built upon the enduring bones of the past. The scale is almost incomprehensible. The chamber measures about 140 meters by 70, with a capacity to hold close to 80,000 cubic meters of water. That is enough to fill over 30 Olympic swimming pools, a hidden ocean beneath the city's streets. The contemporary historian Procopius, in his work on buildings, described such projects with awe, noting they served not just utility but the greatness of the emperor's mind. His writings emphasize how Justinian's building campaigns were central to the empire's image of invincibility, but this grandeur had a stark, practical source. The water flowed into the cistern via the Valens aqueduct, a marvel of engineering that snaked for hundreds of kilometers from forested hills far outside the city walls. This was the system's genius and its fatal vulnerability. In any siege, an enemy's first goal was to cut that aqueduct, to sever the visible lifeline and watch the city thirst. The Basilica Cistern was the brilliant countermove. When the surface flow stopped, the city simply tapped into its hidden reserve. This reservoir could sustain a population of several 100,000 for months. It meant that a besieging army camped in hardship outside the mighty Theodosian walls was not just facing fortifications, but a city with a secretly extended timeline. The psychological impact was devastating. An adversary would anticipate a city falling in weeks, only to watch it continue its daily life, its fountains still flowing, its morale unbroken as if by magic. This direct link between buried infrastructure and imperial longevity cannot be overstated. The cistern was a battery, storing not energy but time itself, and time was the one resource an enemy could not match. It allowed Constantinople to endure not just one siege, but countless assaults across centuries, turning what should have been a moment of crisis into a prolonged test of an enemy's will. The empire's legendary thousand-year endurance was, in no small part, written in the cool, still waters of this underground cathedral. That mastery of water and time was matched by an equal command over the air itself. Step from the blazing Persian desert into the shadow of a Yakchul, an ancient ice house, and you would feel a startling chill, a pocket of winter preserved through the fiercest summer. This was the 10th tactic, the deliberate creation of subterranean microclimates, turning the Earth's natural insulation into a tool for survival and comfort. Environmental archaeologists study these structures as early triumphs of sustainable engineering, revealing how ancient societies manipulated their environment without consuming finite resources. The principle was elegantly simple. The ground acts as a massive thermal battery. Below a certain depth, the temperature remains remarkably stable, insulated from the extreme swings of the surface. The Yakchul harnessed this with brilliant geometry. These domed structures, often built partially underground, featured thick walls made of a special mortar called sarouj, a mix of clay, sand, ash, and other materials that was highly resistant to heat transfer. They were positioned to catch the cold night winds, which would channel down into an underground storage pit where ice, collected from nearby mountains in winter, could be kept frozen for months, even years. This was not magic but applied physics, creating a local climate divorced from the world above. The application of this geothermal stability was universal. In the underground cities of Cappadocia we discussed earlier, the constant cool temperature was not a happy accident, but a calculated feature of their design. The rock maintained a livable range year-round, offering shelter from the searing heat of summer and the bitter cold of winter, making these subterranean spaces genuinely habitable for extended periods. But the manipulation could work in reverse, harnessing heat with equal ingenuity. Consider the Roman hypocaust, a system that transformed the floor into a radiator. In a bathhouse, a furnace would burn in a service room, heating the air in a hollow space beneath the raised tile floors. This warm air would then circulate through box tiles embedded in the walls before escaping through chimneys, creating a uniformly heated room. The entire luxurious experience of a Roman bath, that enveloping warmth, was engineered from below. Even industrial processes relied on this stable underground environment. Potters' kilns and certain metalworking forges were often built partially subterranean to maintain a consistent firing temperature, protected from surface winds and temperature fluctuations that could ruin a batch of ceramics or a smelt. This reveals a sophisticated, early form of environmental science. These cultures understood that to thrive in an extreme climate, they could not just endure it on the surface. They had to architect an alternative reality beneath it. They were not fighting their environment, but collaborating with the deep, stable rhythms of the earth itself to create pockets of ideal conditions. This tactic of climate control was a quiet revolution in sustainability, a way to secure comfort, preserve food, and enable industry by borrowing the eternal, steady temper of the world below. The underworld was a perfect reflection of the world above, a place where social divisions were not erased but carved in stone. While the elite retreated to spaces of astonishing luxury, the common citizen sought shelter in the most basic of refuges, revealing that survival itself was a privilege. Sociologists of the ancient world note that access to subterranean safety, its location, and its amenities were potent markers of status, a hidden blueprint of who mattered most when danger arrived. Consider the Etruscan hypogee, the lavish underground tombs and banquet halls of nobles. These were not mere resting places, but opulent extensions of a family's power, decorated with vibrant frescoes depicting feasts, dancers, and scenes of an idealized afterlife. They were designed for continued social ritual, spaces where the elite could symbolically dine with their ancestors, reinforcing their lineage's eternal prominence even in death. The experience was one of curated comfort and legacy, a private, sacred club beneath the earth. Contrast this with the reality for a farming family on a distant Roman frontier during an attack. Their refuge was likely a simple, hastily dug pit shelter near their home, a cramped, dark hole shared with neighbors and livestock. There were no frescoes here, only the smell of damp earth and the sound of fearful whispers. The difference was not just in decoration but in fundamental security and dignity. The elite hypogee were permanent, architecturally sound, and often secretly located. The pit shelter was temporary, vulnerable, and exposed. This disparity reveals a harsh truth about urban survival strategies. They were never socially neutral. The planning that went into a city's hidden infrastructure invariably prioritized the protection of power centers, state granaries, and elite passageways. The security of the ruling class was systematically engineered, while the safety of the populace was often an improvised collective hope. This dynamic served a dual purpose during a crisis. Firstly, it physically safeguarded the leadership, ensuring the continuity of command and social order. Secondly, it reinforced the existing hierarchy by making protection a visible benefit of status. When the alarm sounded, everyone scrambled for safety, but they did not all scramble to the same place. The journey underground did not lead to equality. but to a stark, physical manifestation of one's place in the social order. This inherent tension between collective survival and stratified security was a silent, powerful force within any ancient capital, a reminder that the plans to save a city were also, inevitably, plans about who within it was deemed most worth saving. The most profound threats to an ancient city were often invisible. While armies clashed at the gates, a far deadlier enemy could fester within the walls, born from the simple, unavoidable reality of dense human life. This 12th strategy confronts that intimate danger, revealing how the brilliant, unseen management of waste and water formed an invisible shield, a preemptive strike against disease. To understand this, we travel to the meticulously planned streets of the Indus Valley cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa over 4,000 years ago. Here, archaeologists uncovered something astonishing, not in the grand citadels but beneath the streets, a city-wide network of brick-lined drains and sewers. This was not a haphazard system. Each home was connected to a main channel with carefully designed slopes that used gravity to carry waste away from living spaces. Remarkably, many houses featured dedicated bathing areas and latrines that emptied directly into these covered drains, which were regularly accessed for cleaning through removable brick covers. Public health historians point to this as a foundational revolution in urban living. By engineering a method to systematically remove waste, these early planners were directly combating the vectors of illness, preventing the contamination of drinking water and the spread of pathogens that could decimate a population more swiftly than any siege. The integration was key. Clean water from wells was kept separate from the waste removal channels, a deliberate segregation of intake and outflow. This was proactive, invisible maintenance on a civic scale. It recognized that a city's greatest challenge might not be an external army, but the biological consequence of its own success and density. The system allowed for higher, healthier population concentrations, which in turn supported more complex social structures and economic specialization. The lesson is starkly clear. Longevity depends on a society's ability to manage the literal byproducts of its existence. A clean city was a resilient city, and that cleanliness was engineered from below, a silent, flowing architecture dedicated not to glory, but to the fundamental, unglamorous work of keeping a community alive. Beneath the disciplined ranks of the terracotta army lies a deeper secret. The first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, did not just build a tomb, he engineered an entire mirrored kingdom underground, a testament to his belief that power must extend eternally. His capital, Xi'an, was the center of this ambition, and recent archaeological surveys using ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive techniques have begun to map its staggering scale. The reports describe a subterranean palace complex of unprecedented grandeur, rumored to replicate the geography of his empire, complete with miniature palaces and, according to ancient texts, rivers and oceans simulated with flowing mercury. This was not mere myth. Soil samples from the mound have shown significantly elevated mercury levels, lending startling credence to the historical accounts. For the emperor, this underworld was a literal vehicle for immortality, a protected realm where his rule would continue uninterrupted by the passage of time. But his obsession with control was equally manifest in the world of the living. Across the strategic landscapes of his newly unified China, his engineers constructed a network of military tunnels and fortified underground passages known as didao. These were not for refuge but for rapid, unseen movement. Sinologists explain that these tunnels allowed elite troops and messengers to traverse difficult terrain, appear behind enemy lines, or reinforce distant garrisons with shocking speed. They turned the very earth into a strategic highway, extending the emperor's reach and tightening his grip on a vast, rebellious territory. This duality reveals the ultimate ideological drive behind such projects. For Qin Shi Huang, the underground was the perfect medium to assert permanent authority. It was a hidden space where he could sculpt his own eternity with mercury rivers and clay armies, and a practical tool to dominate the present through covert military logistics. The tunnels and the tomb were two sides of the same coin, one ensuring his legend would never end, and the other ensuring his enemies could never truly hide. This case study shows that when ideology fuels excavation, the result is more than an engineering feat. It is a deliberate haunting, an attempt to make the ruler's influence an inescapable, permanent layer of the landscape itself. A single room could hold an entire community's changing fate. Within the honeycombed depths of a Cappadocian underground city, you would not find dedicated, specialized spaces like those in a surface town. Instead, you would encounter chambers of profound ambiguity, blank canvases carved from rock. One large, rounded room with a high ceiling might, in a time of peace, serve as a stable with tethering rings carved into the walls. But let a threat emerge, and that same space could be swiftly cleared and transformed. A simple stone altar might be moved into a niche, turning it into a chapel for prayer. Straw mats could be unrolled across the floor, converting it into a dormitory for dozens of displaced families. Or with its cool, stable temperature, it could become a secure granary, its entrance sealed with one of those massive stone doors. This was the 14th principle, adaptability, and it turned passive shelter into an active tool for survival. Architectural historians studying these sites emphasize that this flexibility was not an accident, but a deliberate design philosophy. The spaces were often left intentionally plain, with minimal permanent fixtures. The key features were elements of transformation, like carved ledges that could serve as seating, shelves, or sleeping platforms. Movable partitions, perhaps wooden screens or heavy cloth hangings, could subdivide a large hall for privacy or different functions. Even the ventilation shafts we discussed earlier served a dual purpose. They were essential for air, but their narrow channels could also act as rudimentary communication tubes, allowing coded taps or whispers to travel between levels. This multi-purpose design granted a community incredible dynamic range. In the face of an invading army, the entire city could switch to a defensive fortress mode. During a period of internal social tension, different family groups could be allocated separate chambers without the need for new construction. After a natural disaster damaged the surface dwellings, the underground city could immediately transition to a long-term residential hub. The lesson is stark: a rigid, single-use space is a vulnerability. It can only respond to the crisis it was built for, but a flexible, ambiguous space is a form of intelligence. It can think, it can adapt. It allows the people within it to make rapid, collective decisions about how to best use the resources they have. This ancient insight feels strikingly modern. Today's architects designing multi-use disaster shelters or emergency bunkers grapple with this same challenge: how to create spaces that are secure yet not prison-like, functional yet adaptable to unknown future needs. The silent, multi-layered rooms of Cappadocia suggest that the most resilient space is not the strongest one, but the smartest one, the room that is always ready to become something else. The most secure secret is one that is never written down. For an ancient capital, the true strength of its hidden world lay not just in its stone and mortar, but in the carefully guarded minds of those who built it. The location of a sacred spring, the true purpose of a branching tunnel, the existence of a hidden granary, these were not public facts but closely held state secrets. This 15th insight reveals that survival often depended on a deliberate, controlled forgetting, a strategic secrecy that protected critical infrastructure from those who would exploit or destroy it. Imagine the immense power held by the master diggers of the Persian Khanate. These were not common laborers, but a hereditary guild of engineers who possessed a profound, almost mystical understanding of hydrology and geology. Their knowledge was passed from father to son, a protected oral tradition that mapped the invisible veins of water deep beneath the desert. They knew where to dig, how to maintain the precise gradient, and how to repair a collapse. To share this knowledge widely would risk a rival tribe poisoning a water source or a conqueror seizing control of the lifeblood of a region. The secrecy was a form of armor, making the system itself as elusive as the water it carried. This practice extended far beyond water. In medieval European monasteries, often the only fortified and literate institutions in a region, secret passages and hidden rooms were common. The layouts of these tunnels, used for safeguarding relics, hiding during raids, or even for the discreet movement of monks, were likely known only to the abbot and a trusted few. The plans were rarely committed to parchment, and if they were encoded in symbolic diagrams understandable only within the order. This created a fascinating paradox. The very act of hiding a system to protect it also made that system fragile. If the sole keeper of the knowledge met an unexpected end, if a guild was dispersed, or if an oral tradition was broken, the secret died with them. A hidden spring could be lost, its entrance forgotten and reclaimed by the earth. A vital escape tunnel could become a sealed tomb, its purpose erased from memory. The balance was incredibly delicate. Concealment ensured immediate security, but it threatened long-term continuity. This tension forces us to reconsider what we mean by a resilient city. It suggests that survival depends not only on what is built, but on the careful, almost sacred stewardship of the knowing. The community had to master a dual discipline, building in shadows while also ensuring the flame of that essential knowledge was never extinguished, passed like a whispered torch from one generation to the next, always illuminating just enough to ensure the darkness remained a refuge and never a grave. The wealth of Athens was not quarried from its marble temples, but from a desolate coastal range 25 miles to the south. In the dark, stifling tunnels of Laurion, the metallic ring of a bronze pick against stone was the sound of an empire being born. This 16th layer reveals a brutal truth, that the glittering achievements of a golden age were often forged in a sunless world of relentless labor. The silver extracted here was not merely a commodity. It was the direct fuel for Athenian democracy and its dominant navy. Economic historians trace a direct line from the ore deep in those hills to the triremes that ruled the Aegean. Each year, the state leased mining rights to wealthy citizens, who then operated the pits using a massive workforce of enslaved individuals, creating a brutal but immensely profitable colonial industry far from the city's elegant agora. The engineering challenges were immense. Miners followed narrow silver-bearing seams deep into the earth, confronting two constant enemies, bad air and flooding. Ventilation was primitive, relying on connecting shafts to create drafts, while water was lifted out in stages using buckets or simple hand-operated pumps, a Sisyphean task that limited how deep they could dig. Timber supports braced the crumbling rock, a perilous forest holding up the crushing weight of the mountain. The payoff, however, reshaped history. In the year 483 before the Common Era, a massive new vein was discovered. The statesman Themistocles convinced the assembly to use this sudden windfall not for public distributions, but to build 100 new warships. This fleet would soon defeat the invading Persians at the Battle of Salamis, saving Greece and securing Athenian supremacy. The public buildings, the stipends for jurors, the very functioning of direct democracy were underwritten by this subterranean treasure. This created a profound and troubling dependency. A capital's survival and splendor could be literally rooted in the exploitation of deep earth resources, making control of mines a supreme geopolitical imperative. It was a double-edged sword, a source of glorious power that rested on a foundation of profound human hardship, reminding us that the light of a civilization often casts a very long and very dark shadow. A siege is a battle of minds long before it becomes a test of walls. The most devastating weapon in an ancient arsenal was not the catapult or the battering ram, but a simple, whispered fact that the city you were trying to starve could feed itself for half a year without ever seeing the sun. This 17th strategy reveals that the true power of the underground was often intangible, a psychological fortress built from rumor and awe. Military thinkers have always understood this. The ancient strategist Sun Tzu wrote that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, and that all warfare is based on deception. What greater deception could there be than a city that appeared vulnerable on the surface, yet possessed a hidden, bottomless well of endurance? Rulers were masterful cultivators of this myth. They would allow stories to spread, often exaggerating the true scale of their subterranean stores. An enemy scout might hear tales of granaries so vast they could feed a nation, or cisterns so deep they tapped into mythical underground oceans. These were not lies so much as strategic amplifications, weapons of perception designed to sow doubt before a single arrow was loosed. The effect on a besieging army's morale could be catastrophic. Imagine soldiers camped in the mud, facing disease and dwindling supplies of their own, watching as smoke continued to rise from the city's chimneys and hearing, perhaps, the distant sound of a festival from within the walls. Their entire strategy relied on the enemy's desperation, on the inevitable moment when hunger would force the gates open. To learn that moment might never come was to watch their own purpose evaporate. The prolonged siege became a mirrored trap, exhausting the attacker as much as it was meant to exhaust the defender. This psychological leverage could deter conflict altogether. A neighboring kingdom weighing an invasion might reconsider if the capital was reputed to be a literal hive of underground resilience. Why waste blood and treasure on a fruitless endeavor? The myth of impregnability became a self-fulfilling prophecy, a shield woven from stories that made the physical walls seem even taller and thicker. This transforms our understanding of these hidden networks. They were not just storage facilities or escape routes, they were theaters of information warfare. Their very existence, real or embellished, projected an image of endless resourcefulness and unbreakable will. It proved that survival in the ancient world depended on a dual reality: the tangible strength of stone and the formidable, haunting power of a story that could not be seen but was utterly believed. The stone skeleton of a city can outlive its original flesh. Centuries after the grand subterranean projects of antiquity, a different kind of underground story was being written in the damp, narrow closes of medieval Edinburgh. Here, survival was not a matter of imperial strategy, but of desperate daily adaptation. The city's infamous vaults buried beneath the South Bridge began their life in the late 18th century as a practical solution to a booming urban center. The bridge itself was an engineering feat, constructed to span the treacherous valley of the Cowgate and connect the old town with new developments. But the 40 stone arches that formed its foundation were not left as empty space. They were enclosed, creating a series of around 120 chambers, a brand new subterranean level for the crowded city above. Initially, these vaults were respectable, even vital spaces. Urban historians note they housed taverns, workshops for cobblers and sword makers, and storage for the merchants whose shops lined the bridge overhead. This was the first layer of the palimpsest, a pragmatic use of dead space for commerce and craft, echoing the ancient need to maximize every inch of an urban environment. But cities are never static. Within a few decades, the character of these vaults underwent a profound and grim transformation. As the wealthy merchants on the bridge moved to the more fashionable new town, their former storage spaces were abandoned. The vaults, notoriously damp, poorly lit, and ventilated only by small openings to the street above, became the last resort for a swelling population with nowhere else to go. They descended into overcrowded slums, a hidden warren of poverty beneath the feet of polite society. This was the second, darker layer of the story. The very features that made them unsuitable for fine goods, the constant chill, the darkness, the seclusion, made them a desperate refuge for the city's most marginalized inhabitants. Historical records speak of families crammed into single rooms, with illness spreading rapidly in the stagnant air. The vaults became a shadow city, a stark physical manifestation of social neglect, where survival meant enduring conditions those on the surface could choose to ignore. This duality cemented the vaults in local folklore as places of haunting and mystery. Their total darkness and echoes of past hardship naturally bred tales of supernatural activity. The space became associated with figures like the notorious criminals Burke and Hare, adding a layer of macabre legend to the very real history of suffering. For generations, the vaults were largely sealed and forgotten, a buried secret the city tried to leave behind. Then came the third, unexpected layer of adaptation. In the late 20th century, these forgotten chambers were rediscovered and excavated. Today, they are a major tourist attraction, their history of hardship and legend packaged into guided tours. The survival strategy has completed a full circle from practical commerce to a refuge of last resort, and now to a curated experience that fuels the modern economy. This evolution is a powerful lesson in urban archaeology. It shows that underground spaces are never finished. They are continuously rewritten by the changing needs, fears, and curiosities of the city above. Each era inscribes its own story of struggle and adaptation onto the same ancient stone, creating a deep, resonant record of what it means to live and survive in the layers of a city through time. Even the deepest sanctuary could become a prison. For all their ingenious design, subterranean refuges carried a terrifying duality, a set of inherent risks that could turn a planned escape into a final, silent trap. This 19th principle forces a sobering acknowledgement that every survival strategy has its breaking point, and the world below was no exception. Disaster archaeologists who study these sites uncover stories not of triumph but of profound vulnerability, reminding us that safety is never absolute. The very earth that provided protection could become the agent of collapse. In seismically active regions, a network of tunnels engineered to withstand a siege could be instantly compromised by the violent shaking of an earthquake. A single collapsed passage could sever the only route to the surface, or worse, bring down entire chambers, burying inhabitants in the darkness they had trusted for safety. The risk of entombment was a constant, haunting shadow. Beyond structural failure, the confined nature of these spaces created other lethal dangers. Fire, for instance, behaved with horrific efficiency underground. Without ample ventilation, smoke would quickly fill tunnels and chambers, and the limited exits could become impassable, transforming a refuge into a suffocating oven. The health hazards of prolonged confinement were equally insidious. Even with clever ventilation shafts, air quality in a crowded, deep shelter would inevitably degrade. The buildup of carbon dioxide from human breath, combined with dampness, mold, and poor sanitation, could lead to respiratory illness and the rapid spread of contagion, a hidden biological siege from within. Historical accounts from various conflicts note instances where besieged populations, forced into catacombs or cellars for extended periods, faced severe health challenges that sometimes claimed as many lives as the conflict above. Perhaps the most chilling failures involved water, the very resource these spaces often aimed to secure. Ancient mines, like those at Laurion, were perpetually at risk of catastrophic flooding if a tunnel accidentally breached a hidden aquifer or if drainage systems failed. There are also grim records from medieval history where invaders, discovering the entrances to underground cities or crypts, would not attempt to enter. Instead, they would simply seal the exits or, more ruthlessly, divert smoke or floodwaters into them, deliberately turning sanctuaries into death traps. This honest appraisal teaches a critical lesson in resilience. Reliance on any single solution, no matter how brilliantly engineered, creates a new set of potential failures. The underground was a powerful tool, but it was not a perfect shield. It demanded not just builders, but vigilant maintainers who understood its limits, and leaders wise enough to know that true survival always requires a plan B, and an acceptance that sometimes the greatest refuge can become the most inescapable grave. A ghost city lies beneath our feet, visible only as a shimmer of data on a screen. The revolution in understanding these ancient underworlds is not happening with shovels, but with sensors. Ground-penetrating radar, LIDAR, and other non-invasive technologies are allowing archaeologists to see through time and soil, mapping entire subterranean complexes without disturbing a single stone. A researcher quoted in a recent journal described it as finally having the ability to read a city's entire biography, not just the last chapter. These tools reveal the ghostly outlines of chambers and conduits that have been silent for millennia, hidden beneath modern apartment blocks and highways. Each scan is a revelation, forcing us to rewrite the stories we thought we knew. For decades, a narrow tunnel found beneath a Mayan plaza was assumed to be an escape route. But new, precise mapping showed it aligned perfectly with the sun's path on the solstice, and its walls were covered in symbolic carvings. The evidence now strongly suggests it was a sacred passage, a ceremonial conduit for spiritual journeys rather than physical flight. This is a profound shift in interpretation. It means that some of these spaces were not just about evading a threat, but about connecting with a cosmic order, using the Earth's interior to tap into a deeper source of power and meaning. Every new discovery like this challenges our modern, pragmatic assumptions. We tend to view the past through the lens of survival and utility, but these findings remind us that for ancient cultures, the spiritual and the practical were inextricably linked. A tunnel could be both a physical safeguard and a metaphysical bridge. This ongoing process of discovery shows that our understanding is never complete. Each technological advance peels back another layer, revealing greater complexity in how these societies perceived safety, risk, and their place in the world. Today, this knowledge is not just academic. The principles uncovered by studying ancient subterranean networks directly inform modern urban archaeology and heritage conservation, guiding how we protect these fragile sites. More surprisingly, they influence contemporary disaster preparedness planning. Engineers studying the passive ventilation of Cappadocia or the resilient, flexible spaces of multi-use shelters are looking to the past for inspiration, seeking time-tested solutions for climate resilience and emergency refuge. The buried blueprints of antiquity are becoming a living library for the future, proving that the most enduring survival strategies are those learned from the deep, quiet wisdom of the ground itself. The logic of the hidden cistern is alive and well beneath the streets of Tokyo. There, a cavernous underground cathedral, known as the Metropolitan Area Outer Underground Discharge Channel, waits silently for the next catastrophic flood. Its 5 immense silos, each large enough to contain a space shuttle, are connected by a tunnel over 4 miles long. When floodwaters threaten the city, this system activates, diverting the deluge into a vast subterranean reservoir before pumping it safely into a river. The chief engineer of the project once noted in an interview that the core challenge was timeless, not just moving water, but buying time against a relentless natural force. This is the 21st parallel, where ancient strategies of subterranean resilience are reborn with modern steel and concrete. The fundamental principles have not changed, only the scale and the machinery. Just as Byzantine engineers used the Basilica cistern to outlast a siege, modern planners use these vast tunnels to outpace a storm. The ancient logic of redundancy, of creating a hidden, parallel system to safeguard the surface, is the bedrock of contemporary urban survival. Civil engineers designing for seismic zones now speak of base isolation, where buildings are essentially placed on giant underground bearings that allow them to float independently of the shaking ground. It is a direct conceptual descendant of the flexible, multi-purpose chambers of Cappadocia, an acknowledgement that survival means designing structures that can adapt to and absorb immense force rather than rigidly resist it. Similarly, the buried command centers of the Cold War era, like the famous facility beneath the Greenbrier Resort in the United States, were the ultimate evolution of the hidden political corridor. They were not for climate control or covert ceremony, but for the continuity of government, a literal underground nerve center designed to keep leadership functioning even if the world above faced unimaginable change. Today, cities are weaving this ancient wisdom into their very foundations. District-scale utility tunnels, often called utility corridors, consolidate power lines, fiber optic cables, and water pipes into accessible, protected underground passageways. This mirrors the Roman ambition to integrate vital systems below ground, safeguarding them from weather, accidents, and intentional disruption while making maintenance more efficient. The comparison reveals a profound continuity. The challenges of dense urban life, the threats of natural disaster and human conflict demand similar responses regardless of the century. We still seek to create backup hearts and lungs for our cities, to hide our most vital functions, and to use the Earth's mass as a buffer against chaos. The technology has advanced from carved tuff to reinforced concrete, from aqueducts to smart sensors, but the foundational insight remains: true resilience is not always visible. It is the quiet, prepared space beneath our feet, the planned redundancy, the secret capacity to endure that ultimately allows a city, ancient or modern, to write its next chapter. A sealed door at the end of a forgotten tunnel is not an ending but a beginning for a story. Long after the practical need for an underground refuge has passed, its memory persists, not in stone, but in the whispers of folklore and the chill of a local legend. This 22nd layer of survival is narrative, where the spaces themselves become characters in a cultural story that outlives their builders. Folklorists who study these persistent tales note they are rarely pure fiction. Instead, they often encode historical truths, communal fears, or moral warnings, acting as an oral archive for events too traumatic or complex to record in official histories. The legend of the Minotaur in the Labyrinth of Crete is a powerful ancient example. More than a simple monster story, it can be interpreted as a mythic memory of a labyrinthine palace complex, of human hardship within its walls, and of the terrifying, inescapable power of a distant ruler. The story packaged a historical reality into a symbolic form that could be told and remembered for generations, ensuring the memory of that place and its lessons about power and sacrifice never faded. This pattern repeats endlessly. In medieval Europe, tales of dragons guarding caverns or treasure hoards often sprang up around the entrances to old Roman mines or sealed tombs, serving as both a warning to the curious and a folk explanation for a mysterious, human-made space. In modern cities, the folklore adapts to contemporary anxieties. Stories of so-called mole people, communities living in abandoned subway tunnels or utility corridors, circulate in many metropolitan areas. These legends, whether based in fact or exaggeration, speak to modern fears of social collapse, homelessness, and a hidden, inverted society operating just beneath the polished surface of the city. They are the updated version of the ancient fear of what might lurk in the dark passages below. Even ghost stories associated with old vaults or cellars often have roots in real events of hardship or loss that occurred there, with the spectral figure serving as a guardian of that memory. This reveals a profound insight that a community's resilience depends not just on physical preparations, but on the stories it tells itself about danger and safety. These narratives become a cultural resource, a way of keeping the knowledge of past vulnerabilities alive in the collective imagination. They ensure that even when a tunnel is filled in or a cistern is forgotten, the lesson it represents, the warning of scarcity, the memory of refuge, the fear of the unseen continues to shape how a community perceives its environment and prepares for future adversity. The most enduring survival strategy may be the one we tell each other in the dark. A new discovery beneath the earth presents a modern riddle. Do we open the door or leave it sealed? This 23rd layer is not carved from stone, but from our own choices, confronting the profound ethical dilemma of how we interact with these ancient survival blueprints today. For every site like Derinkuyu, fully excavated and open to visitors, there are dozens more whose entrances remain deliberately covered, their secrets intentionally preserved in the dark. Heritage management professionals grapple with this tension daily, weighing competing values that all hold merit. On one side lies the immense value of knowledge. Careful archaeological excavation can answer fundamental questions about engineering, daily life, and social structure, adding vital chapters to the human story. It can also fuel local economies through responsible cultural tourism, giving communities a tangible connection to their past, yet the opposing argument carries equal weight. The act of excavation is, by its nature, destructive. Once a sealed chamber is opened, its unique microclimate is lost forever. Artifacts can crumble upon exposure to air, and wall paintings can fade rapidly under modern light. There is also a powerful argument for respect, for allowing a site to rest in the context for which it was built, its integrity intact as a complete time capsule for future generations who may have even better tools for understanding. This debate extends beyond science to the rights of descendant communities. In many regions, local populations view these sites not as abandoned ruins, but as ancestral spaces holding deep cultural and sometimes spiritual significance. Professionals in the field increasingly emphasize that their input is not just beneficial but essential. A decision made by distant academics to excavate can feel like a violation, a second disruption of a sanctuary meant for permanence. The damage of uncontrolled access, often called looting or souvenir hunting, provides a stark warning of what is at stake. A tunnel scoured by careless hands loses the subtle context clues, the layers of dust that tell a story of its final days. A wall carving chiseled out for a private collection severs a narrative forever. This is why modern approaches increasingly favor a strategy of minimal intervention. Technologies like three-dimensional laser scanning and photogrammetry allow researchers to create incredibly detailed digital twins of entire complexes without ever touching a fragile wall. These virtual models can be studied by scholars worldwide, shared with the public through immersive experiences, and preserved indefinitely as a record, even if the physical site someday deteriorates. This represents the evolution of our own survival strategy for this heritage. It acknowledges that our curiosity must be tempered by a deep responsibility. The goal shifts from possession to preservation, from extraction to understanding. We are learning that sometimes the most respectful way to honor an ancient refuge is to protect its silence, ensuring that the profound lessons it holds about resilience, community, and foresight remain intact, not as a spectacle, but as a lasting legacy for the unknown seekers of tomorrow. The underground cities of Cappadocia were not a collection of isolated tactics, but a single, breathtaking symphony of survival. To walk through the restored levels of Derinkuyu or Kamakli is to witness a master plan where every strategy we have discussed, from defense to psychology, was woven together into a unified, living system. Archaeologists who have spent years mapping these complexes describe a coordinated design of astonishing foresight. The cities were not built level by level over centuries. but were conceived as integrated wholes, with different zones and functions stacked and connected with precise intention. The entrance itself was a lesson in defense, often hidden within a surface dwelling or a hillside, protected by that massive, rolling stone door. Once inside, the first levels typically housed the most public and frequently used spaces. Large, rounded chambers served as stables for livestock, their floors sloped and grooved to channel waste away, a simple yet effective form of sanitation. Moving deeper, the environment changed. The air grew cooler and more still. Here, in the middle levels, rows of identical living quarters lined long corridors. These were not cramped holes, but family rooms with carved benches, niches for oil lamps, and spaces for storage. Communal kitchens and worship areas were strategically placed to serve clusters of these dwellings, fostering the social bonds essential for a community under prolonged stress. Ventilation was the invisible conductor of this symphony. Those narrow, 70-meter-deep shafts did more than bring in air, they regulated the entire atmosphere. By creating a constant, gentle draft, they prevented the buildup of smoke from cooking fires, carried away humidity, and ensured that even on the deepest levels, people could breathe easily. Water was secured through deep, protected wells, tapped far below the city into the same aquifer that fed the surface, making the community independent of outside sources. And everywhere, the principle of adaptability reigned. A large central hall could be a marketplace in times of peace, a communal dining area during a month-long retreat, or an emergency dormitory. The design anticipated need and allowed for fluid reorganization. This deep, interconnected planning created something far greater than a hiding place. It formed a self-sufficient ark capable of supporting tens of thousands of people for months. Every element, from the placement of a granary to the curve of a staircase that slowed invaders, worked in concert. This was the peak of integrated, community-focused survival engineering, proving that resilience is not found in any single wall or tunnel, but in the harmonious connection of all the parts, a silent, enduring testament to what people can build together when facing the deepest darkness. The earth beneath our cities is the oldest renewable resource we have. For too long, the modern world has viewed the subsurface as a place for sewers, subways, and storage, a purely utilitarian space or a final emergency option. Yet the ancient blueprints we have explored reveal a more profound relationship, one of symbiosis. The 25th principle asks us to re-evaluate this hidden realm not as a last resort, but as a core, sustainable component of a living urban ecosystem. This is not about retreating underground, but about intelligently integrating it, using its inherent properties to solve modern problems of energy, water, and space. Sustainable architects and urban planners are now looking back to these ancient models with renewed respect, seeing in them a timeless logic for building greener, more resilient cities. The core insight is simple: the ground is a massive thermal battery. Just as the Yakchul of Persia used the Earth's constant cool to preserve ice, modern Earth-sheltered buildings leverage this same stability. By building into a hillside or covering a structure with a layer of soil, architects can dramatically reduce the energy needed for heating and cooling. The Earth's mass insulates against summer heat and winter cold, creating a naturally temperate interior that requires far less mechanical intervention. This is not futuristic speculation, it is a return to a fundamental principle understood for millennia. The ancient builders of Cappadocia did not have furnaces or air conditioners. They had geometry and geology, designing their spaces to maintain comfort through the Earth's own steady rhythm. Today, that principle scales up to district-wide geothermal heating and cooling networks. These systems use a grid of pipes buried deep underground to exchange heat with the constant temperature of the Earth. In winter, fluid circulating through these pipes draws warmth from the ground to heat buildings. In summer, it carries excess heat from buildings back into the Earth to cool them. It is a closed loop, a silent, efficient exchange that mimics the ancient understanding of the ground as a thermal partner. This approach directly tackles urban sprawl and environmental impact. By building down as well as up, cities can preserve precious surface land for parks, agriculture, and community spaces, reducing the pressure to constantly expand outward. An underground data center, for instance, uses less energy for cooling and frees up surface real estate. A subsurface water recycling plant, treating and storing grey water for non-potable uses, echoes the ancient Cistern's logic of local resource security while conserving fresh water. These contemporary projects are not copies of the past, but evolutions of its core wisdom. They recognize that the most profound survival strategy revealed by early capitals is not domination but partnership. It is learning to live with the earth in a balanced, reciprocal relationship where the hidden layers of a city actively contribute to its health and longevity. This forward-looking principle suggests that true urban resilience lies in harmony, in designing our cities as integrated organisms that draw strength from the ground they stand on, just as the greatest capitals of history once did. These silent cities offer more than just lessons in history. They provide a powerful language for understanding our own inner landscapes. Each one of us carries a kind of psychological underground, a hidden architecture of self where we store our strength, retreat for safety, and draw upon reserves we often forget we have. The ancient strategies of survival become, in this light, profound personal metaphors. Consider your own secret aqueducts, the steady, unseen sources that nourish your spirit. What are the relationships, the practices, or the beliefs that channel resilience into your life, even when the surface feels arid? These are your lifelines, the connections you maintain to ensure a flow of meaning and support, protecting you from being emotionally besieged. Then there are the catacombs of memory, those quiet chambers where you preserve what matters most. These are not tombs, but sanctuaries for your identity, holding the stories of who you are, the values you cherish, and the loved ones you carry with you. In times of confusion or loss, we instinctively descend into these spaces to remember our roots and reaffirm our purpose, gathering strength from our own history. And what of your rolling stone door? This is the boundary you can choose to seal, the ability to say no, to shut out the noise and chaos when you need to protect your inner peace and regroup. It is not about permanent isolation, but about the strategic control of what you let in. The multi-purpose room of Cappadocia is perhaps the most relatable metaphor of all. It represents our own capacity for adaptability, the mental and emotional flexibility to transform a space of hardship into one of rest, a place of work into one of worship, or a moment of defeat into a lesson learned. Our personal resilience depends on this very ability to redefine our inner chambers based on the challenges we face. So, as we marvel at the engineering of ancient capitals, we might also turn the inquiry inward. What does your subterranean blueprint look like? Have you mapped your resources, secured your emotional water supply, and designed spaces for both refuge and transformation? Understanding how a city survived for centuries is not just an archaeological exercise. It is an invitation to build a more resilient, multifaceted self, ensuring that beneath the visible persona we present to the world, there exists a deep, well-planned, and enduring foundation. The true legacy of these buried cities is not in their stone, but in their silence. As we resurface from this exploration, the lesson is clear. The greatest capitals endured not just by what they built upwards, but by what they wisely concealed downwards. Their longevity was a feat of multidimensional thinking, a chess game played on two boards simultaneously, the visible and the invisible. From the echoing sewers of Rome to the still waters of Constantinople's cisterns, these hidden worlds reveal that urban survival is never a single solution. It demands foresight in securing resources, adaptability in design, and an unshakable strength in community. The underground was their ultimate contingency plan, a physical manifestation of the ancient understanding that to survive a crisis, you must prepare for the one you cannot yet see. These strategies quietly challenge us to look beneath the surface of our own sprawling modern cities. Where are our redundant systems? What unseen networks hold our collective well-being? More personally, they invite us to consider the foundations we build in our own lives. Resilience, as these ancient engineers understood, is not about a single unbreakable wall, but about depth, about having layers of support and spaces for adaptation. It is often forged in the dark, quiet places out of sight, in the careful planning and communal trust that happens long before the storm arrives. Let this journey remind you that history's most enduring lessons are not always displayed in museums. They are sometimes waiting in the cool, still dark, offering timeless blueprints for endurance. If these hidden histories have captivated you, there are countless more mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Share in the comments which subterranean strategy you find most compelling for our own future, and join us as we continue to explore the profound echoes of our past.